Grand Theft Auto Vice City is a game that doesn't really have lore in the traditional sense. It's not a fantasy world with ancient gods and mysterious prophecies. It's a crime story set in a fictionalized version of 1980s Miami, and the story it tells is remarkably straightforward compared to something like Elden Ring or Red Dead Redemption. But what Vice City does have is one of the most perfectly executed crime narratives in gaming, a rise-to-power story that channels Scarface and Miami Vice and every other piece of 1980s crime media into something that feels authentic to the era while still being completely insane. This is a game about a man named Tommy Vercetti, who goes from being a middle-tier mobster to running an entire city's criminal empire in a matter of weeks. And the way that transformation happens, the people he meets and betrays and kills along the way, that's the story we're going to tell. This is the entire lore of Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Every mission, every character, every betrayal, told from beginning to end without making anything up or speculating beyond what the game explicitly shows and tells us. The game begins in 1986 with Tommy Vercetti being released from prison after serving 15 years for murder. Tommy was a member of the Forelli crime family in Liberty City, which is the GTA universe's version of New York, and he was sent to kill one man but ended up killing 11. The exact details of what happened aren't fully explained, but what matters is that Tommy kept his mouth shut, didn't rat on anyone, and did his full sentence without complaint. This earned him respect in the criminal underworld, but it also cost him 15 years of his life. He's now in his mid-30s, getting out into a world that's changed dramatically since he went in, and the Forelli family has plans for him. The significance of Tommy's prison time cannot be overstated because it defines everything about his character and his motivation. Tommy went into prison in 1971, which means he missed disco, he missed punk rock, he missed the entire cultural transformation of the 1970s and early 1980s. The world he knew was pre-Watergate, pre-Vietnam withdrawal, pre-everything that defined the cynicism and excess of the Reagan era. He went in during an era when the mob still had significant power and respect, and he's coming out into a world where organized crime is fracturing and new players are moving in. The 15 years also means Tommy has no money, no connections that are still current, and no idea how Vice City operates. He's starting from zero in a lot of ways, which makes his rapid rise even more remarkable. Sonny Forelli, the Don of the Forelli family, doesn't trust Tommy anymore despite his loyalty. 15 years is a long time, and Sonny is paranoid that Tommy might have become unstable or unreliable in prison. So rather than welcoming Tommy back into Liberty City operations, Sonny sends him down to Vice City to handle a drug deal. This is essentially a test, a way to see if Tommy still has what it takes, and also a way to get him out of Liberty City where his presence makes people nervous. Sonny is using Tommy as a middleman for a cocaine deal between the Forellis and the Vance brothers, who are Vice City drug dealers. The plan is simple. Tommy takes the Forellis' money, meets the Vance brothers at a docks location, exchanges cash for cocaine, and brings the drugs back to Liberty City. It should be a routine transaction, the kind of deal that happens every day in the criminal underworld. The relationship between Tommy and Sonny is complicated and layered with the kind of resentment that festers over time. Tommy gave 15 years for Sonny's family. He took the fall for whatever hit went wrong back in 1971, and his reward is being sent away on what's essentially a punishment detail. Sonny couches it in terms of opportunity and trust, telling Tommy this is his chance to prove himself again. But both of them know what it really is. It's exile with a task attached, a way to keep Tommy busy and distant while Sonny figures out what to do with him long term. This dynamic sets up the eventual conflict between them, because Tommy knows he's being used and Sonny knows that Tommy knows, and there's an undercurrent of hostility beneath every conversation they have throughout the game. Tommy arrives in Vice City and is met by Ken Rosenberg, a nervous lawyer who works for the Forelli family and who's been tasked with facilitating this deal. Ken is not a tough guy. He's an anxious, cocaine-addicted lawyer who's in way over his head, and he's clearly terrified of screwing this up because he knows what the mob does to people who fail them. Ken takes Tommy to a hotel, and then they head to the docks for the deal. They meet with the Vance brothers, and the exchange seems to be going smoothly. Money for cocaine, everyone's professional. But then everything goes wrong. Masked gunmen ambush the deal, shooting the Vance brothers and everyone else, stealing both the Forelli's money and the cocaine, and leaving Tommy and Ken as the only survivors. Tommy manages to escape the ambush, but the damage is done. The money's gone, the drugs are gone, and Sonny Forelli is going to be extremely unhappy about this. This ambush is the inciting incident that sets the entire story in motion, because Tommy now has to figure out what happened and get back either the money or the drugs, or somehow make enough money to pay back Sonny, before the Forellis decide he's a liability and have him killed. Ken is panicking, convinced they're both dead men, but Tommy is more focused. He's been in prison for 15 years, and he's not about to let some Vice City punks ruin his second chance. So Tommy decides he's going to find out who ambushed the deal, get revenge, and build his own criminal empire in Vice City to replace what was lost. The game's story is essentially Tommy's transformation from an errand boy for the Forelli family into the most powerful criminal in Vice City, and it happens through a series of alliances, betrayals, and increasingly audacious crimes. The immediate aftermath of the ambush shows Tommy's character clearly. While Ken is having what amounts to a panic attack, worrying about what Sonny will do to them and whether they should flee the country, Tommy's already thinking strategically. He's not panicking because panic is a luxury for people who have options, and Tommy doesn't have options. He has to move forward, has to start building something, because standing still means dying. This ruthless pragmatism is what separates Tommy from the other criminals in Vice City. He doesn't waste time on fear or self-pity. He just identifies what needs to be done and starts doing it. Tommy's first priority is to establish himself in Vice City and start making money. Ken introduces him to Colonel Juan Cortez, a former Venezuelan colonel who's now living in Vice City and who has connections throughout the city's criminal underworld. Cortez is the one who arranged the original drug deal, and he claims he has no idea who ambushed it, but he offers to help Tommy get established in the city. Cortez throws a party on his yacht where Tommy meets several important figures in Vice City's criminal landscape. There's Ricardo Diaz, a loud, aggressive drug lord who controls much of Vice City's cocaine trade from his mansion on Starfish Island. There's Kent Paul, a British music manager who runs the Malibu Club and who has his fingers in various criminal enterprises. And there's Mercedes Cortez, the colonel's daughter, who becomes Tommy's sometime girlfriend, and who introduces him to various opportunities around the city. Colonel Cortez is an interesting character because he represents the old guard of Vice City's criminal establishment, someone who came to power through military connections and political upheaval rather than through traditional organized crime channels. Cortez is cultured and refined compared to the other criminals Tommy meets. He collects art and throws sophisticated parties and speaks multiple languages, but he's just as ruthless and violent as anyone else when business requires it. His connections come from his time in the Venezuelan military, where he presumably was involved in all sorts of coups and corruption, and he's brought those connections to Vice City, where they've made him wealthy and influential. The party on his yacht is significant because it's Tommy's introduction to how Vice City's criminal hierarchy works, It's not like Liberty City where the mob families have clear structures and everyone knows their place. Vice City is more chaotic with various factions and independent operators all competing for territory and influence. Cortez gives Tommy some initial work, mostly small jobs that introduce him to how Vice City operates. There's a mission where Tommy has to protect a deal that's happening, another where he has retrieve stolen goods, typical mob work that establishes Tommy as reliable. But Cortez also reveals that he's planning to leave Vice City soon, that his position here is becoming untenable because of some political issues back in Venezuela, and that he needs to tie up loose ends before he goes. This includes dealing with the French who are trying to kill him for various reasons involving arms deals gone wrong. Tommy helps Cortez fight off assassins and eventually helps him escape Vice City by protecting his helicopter as it leaves the city. With Cortez gone, Tommy loses his initial patron and has to branch out to other connections. The missions for Cortez serve multiple purposes in the game's structure. They teach the player various gameplay mechanics, from driving to shooting to time management, while also establishing Tommy's competence and building his reputation in Vice City. Each successful mission for Cortez is Tommy proving that he's reliable and capable, which is essential because Tommy needs people to trust him enough to give him bigger opportunities. The French assassin storyline is relatively minor, but it shows the international nature of Vice City's criminal underworld. This isn't just local gangs fighting over territory, it's arms dealers and military officers and international conspiracies all happening simultaneously in this one city. Ricardo Diaz becomes Tommy's next employer, though their relationship is complicated from the start. Diaz is paranoid and violent, constantly worried about people stealing from him or plotting against him, and he has a terrible temper that makes him unpredictable and dangerous. But he's also the biggest drug dealer in Vice City, which means working for him provides access to major money and opportunities. Tommy starts doing jobs for Diaz, mostly enforcement work and dealing with rivals. There's a mission where Tommy has to kill a gang leader named Gonzalez who's been skimming from Diaz. There's another where Tommy has to steal multiple shipments of drugs from various gangs around the city. And there's a particularly memorable mission where Tommy has to use a minigun mounted on a helicopter to protect Diaz's mansion from an assault by Haitians, one of Vice City's major gangs. Diaz's character is a brilliant piece of misdirection in the game's narrative structure. When you first meet him, he seems like just another criminal contact, a volatile drug lord who might be useful but also dangerous. The game doesn't immediately reveal that Diaz was behind the original ambush, instead letting you work for him and get to know him while the truth remains hidden. This creates dramatic irony once the revelation happens because you realise you've been working for the person who stole from you and tried to kill you, strengthening your motivation for the eventual revenge mission. Diaz's paranoia is also interesting because it's both justified and self-fulfilling. He's right to worry that people want to kill him and take what he has, but his treatment of subordinates and his violent outbursts also create enemies and ensure that eventually someone will successfully plot against him. The variety of missions for Diaz shows the different aspects of running a drug empire in Vice City. There's the enforcement aspect, killing people who betray you or compete with you. There's the logistics aspect, managing shipments and protecting your supply chains. There's the defensive aspect, protecting your assets from rivals who want to take them. Each mission reinforces that Diaz's empire is constantly under threat and requires constant violence to maintain, foreshadowing what Tommy's life will be like once he takes over. The helicopter minigun mission in particular is significant because it's one of the game's most intense action sequences, and it shows both the scale of Diaz's operation and the level of threat he faces from rivals. While working for Diaz, Tommy continues to build his own operations on the side. Ken Rosenberg tells Tommy about various properties around Vice City that are for sale, and Tommy starts buying businesses as fronts for criminal activities and as sources of legitimate-looking income. One of the first properties Tommy can buy is the Malibu Club, a nightclub that becomes a hub for various criminal operations. The Malibu has its own storyline involving Kent Paul and managing the club's business while dealing with the rival gang problems. Tommy also buys a taxi company, a car showroom, a strip club, a film studio, a printing works, and various other businesses, each with their own missions and storylines. Building an empire. Properties and side businesses. The property system in Vice City is where the game really differentiates itself from previous GTA titles and shows Tommy's transformation from hired muscle to business owner to criminal kingpin. Each property represents a different aspect of Vice City's economy and criminal underworld, and each comes with its own challenges and opportunities. The genius of this system is that it makes you feel like you're actually building something rather than just completing a linear series of missions. You're investing in Vice City, putting down roots, creating infrastructure that will generate ongoing income and give you a stake in the city's future. The Malibu Club storyline is particularly well developed. Kent Paul is managing the club, but he's having problems with security and rival gangs who don't want the Malibu to succeed. Tommy has to complete a series of missions that establish the Malibu as a successful and protected establishment. There's a mission where you have to steal a list of security codes from a rival club to pull off a robbery. There's another where you have to rob a bank while wearing a disguise, a mission that's memorable for its complexity and for the chaos that ensues when the robbery goes wrong, and you have to fight your way out through police and SWAT teams. These Malibu missions feel like proper heist sequences, requiring planning and execution and dealing with complications when things inevitably go wrong. The taxi company, Kaufman Cabs, has a more straightforward storyline centered around a business rivalry with Vice City Cabs. The owner of Vice City Cabs is aggressively trying to destroy Kaufman Cabs through sabotage and intimidation, and Tommy has to fight back by destroying their vehicles and scaring off their drivers. There's a mission where you have to pick up fares before Vice City Cabs can get to them, racing across the city to steal their customers. There's another where you have to blow up their garage and eliminate their vehicles. This storyline is simpler than some of the others, but it reinforces the theme that business in Vice City is war by another name. Everyone is fighting for market share and dominance, and the only difference between legitimate and criminal business is how openly violent you're willing to be. The film studio purchase leads to one of the game's more absurd storylines, where Tommy gets involved in the pornography business. The studio is run by a director who needs Tommy's help filming various adult movies while dealing with rival studios and angry gang members. These missions are played for comedy, with Tommy reluctantly becoming a producer and problem solver for increasingly ridiculous pornographic film productions. There's a mission where you have to protect the filming location from attacking gang members who don't want you making films on their territory. There's another where you have to chase down an actress who's gotten cold feet and fled before filming can be completed. The absurdity of these missions provides comic relief in a game that's otherwise quite dark and violent, and they fit perfectly with the 1980s excess theme that defines Vice City's aesthetic. The printing works involves Tommy producing counterfeit money, which requires stealing printing plates from a secure facility, and then defending the printing operation from police raids. The mission to steal the printing plates is a stealth and action hybrid, where you have to infiltrate a building, avoid or eliminate guards, and escape with the plates while being pursued. Once the printing operation is running, you have to periodically defend it from cops who've discovered what you're doing, fighting off waves of law enforcement while protecting the machinery that's generating your counterfeit cash. This property is purely criminal with no legitimate business front, representing Tommy's willingness to engage in any kind of illegal activity that generates profit. The Cherry Popper ice cream factory is perhaps the most darkly comic property in the game. Tommy turns these seemingly innocent ice cream trucks into mobile drug distribution centres, driving around Vice City selling drugs disguised as ice cream sales. This leads to conflict with other dealers who don't appreciate Tommy moving in on their territory, and you have to defend yourself while making your rounds. The ice cream truck missions are notorious for being both funny and stressful. The juxtaposition of the cheerful ice cream truck music playing while you're engaging in deadly gang warfare perfectly captures Vice City's blend of absurdity and violence. The factory also generates passive income once you've completed enough drug sales, making it a valuable asset despite the relatively minor nature of its storyline. The car showroom becomes a hub for stolen vehicle operations. Tommy has to steal specific high-end vehicles and deliver them to the showroom, where they're presumably sold to wealthy buyers who don't ask questions about provenance. There's a list of vehicles that the showroom wants, and finding and stealing each one becomes a scavenger hunt across Vice City. Some vehicles are easy to find, just driving around until you spot one. Others require breaking into secure locations or stealing from specific NPCs. Completing the vehicle collection generates significant income and gives completionist players a clear goal to work toward. This property represents the theft and resale aspect of organised crime, taking other people's property and converting it into profit. The strip club, Pole Position, is the simplest property in terms of missions, but it's thematically important. All you have to do to complete this property is spend money in the club, sitting and watching the dancers until you've paid enough. This represents the money laundering aspect of Tommy's empire, spending dirty money in legitimate businesses to make it clean. The strip club also shows Vice City's seedy underbelly, the exploitation and vice that underlies the glamorous surface. It's a darker property than some of the others because it's directly involved in the sex industry, and while the game doesn't dwell on the implications, it's part of the complete picture of what Tommy's criminal empire actually involves. While Tommy is building his legitimate and illegitimate business empire, he's also navigating Vice City's complex gang politics. The city is divided among various factions, each controlling different territories and engaged in ongoing conflicts with their rivals. Understanding these factions and playing them against each other becomes an important part of Tommy's strategy for taking over the city. The Cubans are led by Umberto Robina, a stereotypical machismo-obsessed gangster who's constantly trying to prove his manhood and dominance. Umberto runs his operation out of a cafe in Little Havana, and he's engaged in an ongoing territorial war with the Haitians. Tommy does work for Umberto that usually involves attacking Haitian interests, or proving Tommy's toughness through various challenges. There's a mission where Tommy has to destroy Haitian drug operations, another where he has to win a boat race to prove his courage. Umberto is portrayed as somewhat ridiculous, constantly talking about his manliness and his ability to please women, but he's also genuinely dangerous and commands significant resources. His gang controls important territory in Vice City and has enough soldiers to launch major operations against their enemies. The Haitians don't have a clear leader that you interact with directly in the same way you do with Umberto. They're just presented as the Cubans' rivals and as a significant gang presence in Vice City. The game's portrayal of the conflict between Cubans and Haitians is problematic in retrospect, relying on ethnic stereotypes and presenting both gangs as violent and aggressive without much nuance or context. But within the game's narrative structure, This conflict represents the street-level gang warfare that's happening constantly in Vice City, beneath the higher-level criminal operations that Tommy's involved in. The Cuban and Haitian war is background noise for most of the game, violence that's always happening, and that occasionally intersects with Tommy's interest when he needs to use one gang against the other, or when he needs to eliminate both groups from a particular territory. Tommy's approach to the gang situation is purely pragmatic. He'll work for the Cubans when it benefits him, he'll work against them when that's more profitable, and he has no loyalty to either side beyond immediate tactical advantage. This represents Tommy's broader philosophy toward alliances and relationships in Vice City. Everyone is a potential asset or obstacle depending on the current situation, and permanent alliances are for people who can't adapt to changing circumstances. By the end of the game, Tommy has basically subordinated both gangs to his interests. They're still fighting each other, but they're doing it in ways that don't interfere with his operations and might even advance his goals. The Sharks are another gang in Vice City, though they're less prominent than the Cubans and Haitians. The Sharks are a street racing gang that controls certain areas and that Tommy has to deal with occasionally. There are street racing missions where you compete against gang members for respect and territory. These races take you all over Vice City and showcase the game's driving mechanics, while also establishing Tommy as someone who can compete in any arena. Not just violence, but also skill-based competitions. The Sharks represent the illegal racing scene that was a big part of 1980s car culture. The street racers who would bet significant money on underground races, and who would sometimes get into violent conflicts over disputed outcomes or territorial disputes about where races could be held. Beyond the major gang factions, Vice City is populated with memorable side characters who each add texture and depth to the world while providing Tommy with opportunities for profit and advancement. These characters often represent specific aspects of 1980s culture or specific crime movie archetypes, and interacting with them helps establish Vice City as a living world rather than just a series of mission locations. Phil Cassidy is a one-armed gun enthusiast and weapons dealer who lost his arm in an accident involving homemade explosives. Phil is exactly the kind of character you'd expect to find in Vice City, a redneck arms dealer who's more interested in firepower than in profit, and who gets excited about explosions and destruction. Phil sells Tommy weapons and gives him missions that usually involve blowing things up or testing experimental weapons. There's a mission where you have to help Phil after he's lost his arm, driving him to the hospital while he's bleeding out and telling rambling stories about his military service. There's another where you have to destroy a convoy of vehicles using weapons Phil has provided. Phil's missions are mostly about firepower and destruction, reinforcing Tommy's growing reputation as someone not to be crossed, and giving players access to more powerful weapons as the game progresses. Phil represents the American gun culture transplanted to Vice City. The idea that more firepower is always the solution to any problem, and that explosions are inherently entertaining. His character is played somewhat for comedy, the one-armed gun nut who keeps making the same mistakes and getting into the same dangerous situations, but he's also genuinely useful to Tommy as a source of weapons and as someone willing to help with operations that require serious firepower. Phil's place in Vice City's ecosystem shows that there are specialised roles in the criminal underworld. Not everyone is trying to be the boss or the big dealer. Some people are happy being the gun guy or the driver or the specialist who provides a specific service to other criminals. Love Fist is a Scottish rock band that provides some of the game's more comedic missions. Love Fist is staying in Vice City, and they're having various problems including death threats from a psychotic fan, drug overdoses, and publicity stunts that go wrong. Tommy helps them deal with these issues in missions that are played primarily for humour. There's a mission where you have to drive the band's limousine around Vice City while they're drunk and fighting with each other, trying to get them to their concert venue before they kill each other or themselves. There's another where you have to track down and deal with the psychotic fan who's been sending the band death threats, a mission that involves following clues and eventually confronting the fan in a dramatic showdown. Love Fist represents the rock and roll excess of the 1980s, the bands that were famous not just for their music, but for their outrageous behaviour and their apparent determination to self-destruct as publicly as possible. The band members are stereotypical rock stars concerned with drugs and women and partying, more than with their actual music, and their missions don't significantly impact the main story, but they add to the atmosphere of 1980s excess and absurdity that defines Vice City. These missions are essentially comic relief, breaking up the more serious crime storyline with ridiculous situations and over-the-top characters. Mitch Baker and the Bikers represent another faction in Vice City that Tommy has to deal with. Mitch runs a biker gang and he initially doesn't trust Tommy, seeing him as just another city boy mobster who doesn't understand biker culture or values. But Tommy proves himself by doing various tasks for the bikers, including racing missions where you have to win motorcycle races against gang members, and enforcement work where you have to help the bikers deal with their enemies. There's a mission where you have to destroy various targets around the city while riding a motorcycle, proving your skill and commitment. Eventually, Mitch comes to respect Tommy and agrees to provide security for one of Tommy's businesses, giving Tommy access to the bikers as muscle and protection. The bikers represent an independent criminal faction that doesn't fit neatly into the mob hierarchy or the gang structure. They're outlaws in the classic sense, motorcycle gang members who live by their own code and who don't take orders from anyone outside their organisation. Earning their respect is significant for Tommy, because it shows he can work with different types of criminals and can adapt to different social codes and expectations. The bikers also provide Tommy with a certain credibility among other criminal factions. If the bikers respect you and are willing to work with you, that means you're legitimate in a way that money and violence alone can't establish. Avery Carrington is a real estate developer who's trying to acquire valuable property in Vice City through various legal and illegal means. Avery is a corrupt businessman who uses violence and intimidation as readily as legitimate business practices, and he hires Tommy to do his dirty work. There are missions where Tommy has to intimidate property owners into selling, threatening them, or destroying their property until they agree to Avery's terms. There's a mission where you have to destroy a construction site belonging to Avery's rivals, using a demolition vehicle to wreck everything they've built. Avery represents the connection between legitimate business and organised crime in Vice City, the way that supposedly respectable businessmen use criminal methods to advance their interests while maintaining a veneer of legitimacy. Avery becomes a business partner of sorts to Tommy, and they work together on several deals that benefit both of them. Avery provides Tommy with access to real estate and development opportunities, while Tommy provides Avery with the muscle and criminal expertise needed to push through deals that might otherwise fail. This partnership represents Tommy's growing sophistication as a criminal. He's not just a thug or an enforcer anymore. He's a businessman who can work with other businessmen to advance shared interests. However, this partnership doesn't last because later in the game, Tommy is contracted to kill Avery by another character, and Tommy does so without hesitation, showing that in Vice City, loyalty only extends as far as it's profitable, and that partnerships are temporary arrangements based on mutual benefit, rather than genuine friendship or respect. Throughout all of these side activities and business acquisitions, one relationship becomes increasingly central to the story: Tommy's partnership with Lance Vance. Lance is introduced as the surviving brother from the ambushed drug deal at the beginning of the game. Lance has been investigating his brother's death independently, and when he discovers that Tommy is also looking into the ambush, they decide to team up. Lance wants revenge for his brother's death, and Tommy wants revenge for being set up and losing the Forellis' money. Their shared interest in finding and punishing whoever was responsible for the ambush makes them natural allies. Lance is initially presented as a capable partner. He's well-dressed, confident, and seems to have his own resources and connections in Vice City. He helps Tommy with various operations, providing backup and assistance on missions. The two of them work well together at first, pulling off crimes and investigations that neither could handle alone. Lance's presence gives Tommy someone to talk to and strategize with, breaking up the isolation that could otherwise characterize Tommy's rise to power. For the player, Lance serves as a companion character who appears in missions and who provides dialogue and personality to what might otherwise be a solitary experience. The discovery that Ricardo Diaz was behind the original ambush is a turning point for both Tommy and Lance. This revelation comes through their combined investigative work and through conversations with various criminals who have pieces of information about what happened. When they confirm that Diaz was responsible, both Tommy and Lance are ready for revenge. But their motivations are different in important ways. For Lance, this is personal. It's about his brother's death and about family honour. For Tommy, it's partly about the ambush, but it's also about opportunity. Killing Diaz means eliminating the biggest drug dealer in Vice City and creating a power vacuum that Tommy can fill. This difference in motivation foreshadows the eventual conflict between them. Lance is thinking about revenge and justice, while Tommy's thinking about business and expansion. The assault on Diaz's mansion is one of the game's major set pieces. Tommy and Lance plan the attack carefully, gathering weapons and intelligence about Diaz's security arrangements. When they execute the plan, they fight their way through Diaz's heavily armed guards, clearing rooms and advancing toward Diaz's office. The mission is intense and difficult, requiring good shooting skills and tactical awareness. When they finally reach Diaz, there's a confrontation where Diaz realizes he's been outmaneuvered and that his paranoia, while justified, wasn't enough to save him. Tommy kills Diaz, taking revenge for the ambush and eliminating the biggest obstacle to his own rise to power. With Diaz dead, Tommy and Lance take over his mansion and his entire drug operation. They become partners in running Vice City's drug trade, with Tommy as the clear senior partner and Lance as his second in command. This is where the problems in their relationship begin to emerge. Lance feels like he's being treated as a subordinate rather than an equal partner, despite the fact that they took down Diaz together and that Lance's information and assistance were crucial to their success. Tommy makes decisions without consulting Lance. Tommy gets the big office and the respect and the recognition, while Lance feels like he's being left out. These feelings of resentment start to show in Lance's dialogue and behaviour. He complains about being disrespected and about not getting his fair share, and he increasingly challenges Tommy's decisions and authority. Tommy's response to Lance's complaints is dismissive. From Tommy's perspective, he's the one with the experience and the connections and the business sense. Lance is useful, but he's not an equal. Tommy sees Lance as someone who needs to be managed and directed rather than consulted and respected. This dismissiveness is a crucial mistake, because it pushes Lance away and makes him vulnerable to manipulation by others who offer him the recognition and status that Tommy won't provide. Tommy is so focused on building his empire and managing all the different operations and threats that he doesn't realize his closest ally is becoming increasingly dissatisfied and potentially disloyal. The player can see Lance's growing dissatisfaction throughout the later missions of the game. His dialogue becomes more bitter and resentful. He makes comments about not being appreciated and about Tommy taking all the credit for their shared success. There are moments where Lance questions Tommy's decisions or suggests alternative approaches, and Tommy shuts him down or ignores him. For observant players, these moments create a sense of foreboding, a growing certainty that this partnership is not going to end well. The game is building toward Lance's betrayal systematically, giving him clear motivation and showing the relationship deteriorating in ways that make the eventual betrayal feel earned rather than arbitrary. As Tommy's empire grows and becomes increasingly visible, the situation with Sonny Forelli back in Liberty City becomes critical. Sonny has been calling Ken Rosenberg throughout the game, demanding updates on when Tommy's going to pay back the money that was lost in the ambush. Tommy has been stalling, telling Sonny he needs more time to gather the funds, but now that Tommy has taken over Diaz's operation and become visibly wealthy and powerful, Sonny knows that Tommy has money. The pretense that Tommy is struggling to scrape together the cash is no longer believable, and Sonny decides he needs to come to Vice City personally to collect what he's owed. Sonny's position is understandable from a certain perspective. The money that was lost in the ambush was Forelli family money, and from Sonny's point of view, anything Tommy has built with the time and opportunity that money bought belongs to the family. In traditional mob structure, a made man doesn't get to keep his earnings beyond what his superiors allow him to keep. Everything ultimately belongs to the family and gets distributed according to the hierarchy. Tommy getting rich in Vice City while owing the family money is essentially theft, a betrayal of the mob codes that both men supposedly respect. Sonny coming to Vice City is him asserting the traditional order and demanding that Tommy remember his place in the family structure. But Tommy's position is equally understandable. Tommy served 15 years in prison for the Forelli family, taking the fall for a hit gone wrong and keeping his mouth shut despite enormous pressure to cooperate with prosecutors. His reward for that loyalty was being sent to Vice City on what was essentially a suicide mission, a deal that was compromised and that nearly got him killed. The money that was lost wasn't lost through Tommy's incompetence or betrayal. It was stolen in an ambush that Sonny's own planning and intelligence failures made possible, and everything Tommy has built since then, he's built through his own effort and skill and risk, not with Forelli resources or support. From Tommy's perspective, he doesn't owe Sonny anything beyond what he already gave with 15 years of his life. This conflict between traditional mob hierarchy and individual achievement is the thematic core of Vice City's ending. It's not just about money or power, it's about whether Tommy is going to accept his place in a system that used him and discarded him, or whether he's going to assert his independence and claim ownership over what he's built. The game comes down clearly on Tommy's side, presenting his independence as a positive thing, and Sonny's demands as unreasonable and parasitic. But the game also shows that this independence comes with consequences, that breaking with the mob means going to war with people who have significant resources and who don't accept defiance lightly. Sonny arrives in Vice City with several of his men, and the confrontation happens at the Versetti estate, Tommy's mansion and headquarters. Sonny comes in acting friendly at first, congratulating Tommy on his success and talking about old times, but the friendly facade doesn't last long. Sonny gets to the point quickly. He wants $3 million as repayment for the lost drug deal money, and he wants it immediately. Tommy refuses, telling Sonny that he doesn't owe him anything, that he's built this empire himself and it belongs to him alone. Sonny gets angry and threatens Tommy, telling him that he can't just walk away from the Forelli family, that there are rules and obligations that Tommy has to respect. The tension in this scene is palpable because both men know this is the moment where their relationship breaks irreparably. Sonny can't back down without looking weak, and Tommy won't back down because backing down means losing everything he's built. The negotiation is just theatre, both of them performing their roles while preparing for the violence they both know is coming. Sonny is confident because he's brought soldiers, and because he believes he has leverage. But what he doesn't know is that he has something else as well. Something that will turn this confrontation from difficult to catastrophic for Tommy. This is when the betrayal happens. Lance Vance, Tommy's partner and supposed friend, reveals that he's been talking to Sonny behind Tommy's back. Lance has cut a deal with Sonny, agreeing to help the Forellis take over Tommy's operation in exchange for a share of the profits and recognition as the new boss of Vice City. Lance steps forward and makes his allegiance clear, positioning himself with Sonny and against Tommy. The look of satisfaction on Lance's face is obvious. This is his moment of revenge for every slight and dismissal, every time Tommy made him feel like a subordinate rather than an equal partner. The betrayal is devastating for Tommy on multiple levels. Strategically, it means he's now facing not just Sonny's soldiers, but also Lance's knowledge of his operation and his defences. Lance knows where the money is kept, where the weapons are stored, what security measures are in place, all the information that makes this assault much more dangerous than it would otherwise be. But the betrayal is also personally devastating, because Tommy trusted Lance, saved his life, made him wealthy and powerful, and Lance has repaid him by selling him out to the very people who've been trying to exploit Tommy. For Tommy, who spent his entire life in a criminal world where betrayal is common but partnership is supposed to mean something, Lance's treachery represents the final proof that in this life, you truly can't trust anyone. Lance's speech during this betrayal scene is revealing. He talks about how Tommy never respected him, never treated him like an equal, never gave him credit for their shared success. He talks about being tired of being Tommy's sidekick, tired of being the junior partner in an operation he helped build. All of Lance's accumulated resentment comes pouring out, and while his grievances have some validity, the way he's chosen to address them, by betraying Tommy to people who want to steal everything Tommy has built, shows that Lance's concerns were never really about respect or fairness. They were about status and control, about Lance wanting to be the boss regardless of whether he has the skills or temperament to actually run a criminal empire. Lance has been manipulated by Sonny, who understood Lance's resentment and exploited it perfectly, offering Lance the recognition and status he craved while planning to use him and discard him once Tommy was eliminated. The final mission of the game, appropriately titled Keep Your Friends Close, is an extended battle sequence that tests everything the player has learned throughout the game. Sonny's soldiers attack the Vassetti estate from multiple directions, trying to fight their way to Tommy's office where he's keeping the money that Sonny wants to steal. Tommy has to defend the mansion against waves of attackers, fighting from room to room and protecting the safe that contains his fortune. The mansion that represented Tommy's success and power becomes a battleground, with furniture and decorations being destroyed by gunfire and explosions, the physical embodiment of Tommy's empire under assault. The mission structure is designed to be challenging and intense. Enemies come from multiple entry points, forcing you to constantly move and adapt your defensive position. You have to manage your health and armor carefully because there are long stretches between health pickups. You have to protect the safe in your office because if it's destroyed, the mission fails and Tommy's empire is lost. The waves of enemies seem endless, and just when you think you've cleared them out, more appear. This creates a sense of desperate survival, of being outnumbered and fighting for your life against people who want to take everything you've built. Throughout the battle, Ken Rosenberg is hiding somewhere in the mansion, periodically calling Tommy to give updates or express panic about how the battle is going. Ken represents the civilian perspective in this criminal conflict. He's not a fighter, and he's terrified of the violence happening around him. His phone calls provide moments of dark comedy in the midst of the chaos, with Ken's panic and Tommy's grim determination creating a contrast that reinforces how differently they view this situation. For Ken, this is a nightmare that might end with his death. For Tommy, this is business. This is what it takes to keep what's yours in a world where everyone wants to take it from you. As the battle progresses, Tommy fights his way through his own mansion, clearing out Forelli soldiers and protecting his assets. The player sees familiar locations from earlier in the game now transformed into combat zones. The office where you planned operations is now a defensive position. The halls where you walked safely are now filled with enemies. This transformation of the mansion from a symbol of success into a battlefield is thematically significant, showing that power in Vice City is never secure, that every achievement can be threatened and must be constantly defended. Eventually, Tommy has to pursue Lance, who's fled to the roof of the mansion. This rooftop confrontation is the emotional climax of the game, the final meeting between two former partners who are now trying to kill each other. Lance is waiting on the roof with a weapon, and when Tommy arrives, there's a moment where they face each other and acknowledge what's happening. Lance might say something about how it didn't have to be this way, or how Tommy brought this on himself, but ultimately words don't matter anymore. The time for talking ended when Lance chose betrayal over loyalty. The fight with Lance is relatively brief but symbolically important. Lance isn't the final boss in a mechanical sense. He's not the hardest enemy to defeat. But killing him represents Tommy severing the last personal connection he had in Vice City. Lance was the closest thing Tommy had to a friend, despite all the problems in their relationship. And killing him means accepting that Tommy is truly alone now. The moment when Lance dies is both satisfying, because he betrayed Tommy and deserves what he gets, and somewhat melancholy, because it represents the death of the partnership, and the possibility that Tommy might have had someone he could trust. After killing Lance, Tommy returns to his office where Sonny Forelli is waiting. Sonny has presumably been trying to break into the safe or secure the money while his soldiers kept Tommy busy. But now that Tommy has fought through everyone and is back, Sonny realizes his assault has failed. The confrontation between Tommy and Sonny is the final resolution of their conflict, the employee facing down his former boss, the new generation challenging the old guard. Sonny is angry and desperate. He's lost soldiers, his plan has failed, and he's now facing a Tommy who's killed everyone Sonny sent against him. The dialogue between Tommy and Sonny in this moment is sharp and brutal. Sonny threatens Tommy, trying to assert his authority one last time, telling Tommy that the Forelli family will never stop coming after him, that Tommy has made an enemy he can't afford to have. Tommy's response is defiant, making it clear that he's no longer afraid of Sonny or the Forelli family, that whatever power they once had over him died when they sent him into an ambush, and then tried to steal what he built from the ashes. This is Tommy declaring his complete independence, rejecting not just Sonny personally, but the entire mob structure that Sonny represents. The final shootout between Tommy and Sonny is the game's actual final boss fight. Sonny is tougher than regular enemies, requiring more shots to take down and being more aggressive in his attacks. The fight takes place in Tommy's office, the heart of his empire, making it thematically appropriate that this is where Tommy defends everything he's built. When Tommy finally kills Sonny, it's not just the death of one mob boss, it's the symbolic death of Tommy's past, of his obligations to the Forelli family and to the old criminal hierarchy. Tommy has literally killed his boss and gotten away with it, establishing himself as completely independent and powerful, enough to wage war against a major crime family and win. With Sonny and Lance both dead and the Forelli family's attack repelled, Tommy has successfully defended his empire and established himself as completely independent. He's no longer working for anyone, no longer taking orders, no longer part of the old mob structure. Tommy Vercetti is now the undisputed criminal kingpin of Vice City, controlling drugs, businesses and territories throughout the city. Ken Rosenberg emerges from wherever he was hiding, relieved to be alive but also terrified of what comes next because they've just gone to war with a major crime family and there will be consequences. But Tommy's confident, almost serene in his victory. He's built something that can't be taken away, at least not easily, and he's proven that he's willing to kill anyone who tries. The game ends with Tommy standing in his office, surrounded by the money and power he's accumulated. The office is probably damaged from the battle, with bullet holes and bloodstains marking where the final confrontation took place, but Tommy has survived, and his empire remains intact. Ken is talking nervously about what they should do next, whether they should leave Vice City or prepare for retaliation, but Tommy doesn't seem worried. He's proven himself in the most definitive way possible by defending his territory against a coordinated assault from people who wanted to take everything he had. There's no happy ending here, no sense that Tommy has found peace or redemption, because this is a crime story and crime stories don't have happy endings. Tommy has achieved his goal of building an empire, but the cost has been enormous. He's killed dozens, if not hundreds of people throughout the game, including people he worked with and people who helped him. He's betrayed allies when it was convenient, like when he killed Avery Carrington despite their business relationship. He's gone to war with the mob family that he once served, creating enemies that will probably never stop trying to get revenge. And he's alienated his only real friend in Vice City, to the point where Lance felt his only option was to betray Tommy and try to take his empire. Tommy is at the top of the criminal hierarchy, but he's also completely alone. He's surrounded by employees and subordinates, people who work for him because he pays them or because they're afraid of him, but he has no one he can actually trust. Ken Rosenberg is still around, but Ken is a nervous wreck who's in way over his head, and who's certainly not a friend or confidant in any meaningful sense. Everyone else Tommy knew in Vice City is either dead or was never more than a business contact. The mansion that should represent success and comfort is really just an expensive fortress, a place Tommy has to defend against constant threats, rather than somewhere he can relax and enjoy his achievements. The message of Vice City is that crime pays, at least in the short term, but it also isolates you and requires constant violence to maintain your position. Tommy's rich and powerful, but he's also trapped in a life where he can never truly trust anyone, and where he always has to be ready for the next threat. The ending shows Tommy as victorious but not triumphant, successful but not happy. He's won the game, he's beaten everyone who opposed him, but the prize is a life of isolation and paranoia, where the only certainty is that more violence is coming. This ending is perfect for Vice City's tone and themes. The game never pretended to be a moral story or a cautionary tale. It was always a power fantasy about becoming the most powerful criminal in a corrupt city. Tommy achieves that goal completely, and the game lets you enjoy that victory without undermining it with moralizing or consequences that punish you for playing the game. but the victory is also hollow in a way that the game trusts players to recognise without being told. Tommy has everything and nothing simultaneously. He's achieved his goals but lost himself in the process. One of Vice City's greatest strengths is how well its gameplay mechanics support and reinforce the narrative themes. The structure of the game, with its mix of main missions and optional property acquisitions and side activities, mirrors Tommy's approach to building his empire. You're not just following a linear story, you're actively building something, investing in properties and businesses that generate income and expand your influence. This makes the player feel like they're actually constructing a criminal empire rather than just watching a story unfold. The property system is particularly important in this regard. Each property you buy represents a different aspect of Tommy's empire, and completing the missions associated with each property makes that business operational and profitable. This creates a sense of growth and expansion that parallels Tommy's narrative arc from small-time operator to major criminal power. The passive income from properties also changes the gameplay experience. Early in the game, you're always worried about money and trying to scrape together enough to afford weapons and vehicles. But later in the game, you have so much money that you can buy whatever you want without thinking about cost. This economic progression mirrors Tommy's rise to power and makes the player feel wealthy and successful in a tangible way. The mission structure also supports the narrative effectively. Early missions have you doing grunt work for other people, following orders and taking on relatively small-scale crimes. You're stealing cars for criminals, doing protection work, running errands. As the game progresses, the missions become more ambitious and complex. You're robbing banks, attacking fortified positions, assassinating major criminals. By the end of the game, you're defending your mansion against a full assault from a mob family, fighting off waves of enemies in the most intense combat sequences in the game. This progression from small crimes to major operations mirrors Tommy's transformation from low-level operator to criminal kingpin. The wanted level system, where police response escalates based on your crimes, creates a sense that your actions have consequences, and that as you become more powerful and brazen, the authorities pay more attention to you. Early in the game, you might be able to commit minor crimes without much police response, but later, as Tommy becomes more notorious and more dangerous, even small infractions can trigger major law enforcement responses. This reflects the reality that being a successful criminal makes you a target for police and for rival criminals who want to take what you have. The weapon progression is also narratively significant. You start the game with access to only basic weapons, pistols and melee weapons that limit what you can accomplish. As you progress and make more money and build more connections, you get access to better weapons, assault rifles and sniper rifles and rocket launchers. By the end of the game, you're walking around with military-grade hardware that makes you incredibly dangerous. This weapon progression supports the power fantasy at the game's core. You feel yourself becoming more powerful and more capable as the game progresses, which mirrors Tommy's growing influence and resources. The game's open-world structure also serves the narrative by giving players freedom to explore Vice City and engage with optional content at their own pace. You can focus on the main story if you want a more linear experience, or you can spend time buying properties and completing side missions to build your empire more thoroughly. This freedom reflects Tommy's approach to his criminal career. He's not just following orders or moving through a predetermined path. He's actively choosing which opportunities to pursue and which businesses to invest in. The player's agency in deciding how to approach the game mirrors Tommy's agency in deciding how to build his empire. The city itself is designed to support the 1980s crime narrative the game is telling. Vice City is bright and colourful, with neon signs and pastel buildings that evoke Miami Vice and other 1980s crime media. The radio stations play era-appropriate music across multiple genres, from pop to rock to Latin to hip-hop, creating a soundtrack that constantly reinforces the time period. The cars are all based on 1980s designs, boxy and angular with distinctive styling that immediately signals what era this is. Even the fashion and character designs are committed to 1980s aesthetics, with big hair and loud clothing and sunglasses that look ridiculous now, but were stylish then. This commitment to period authenticity makes Vice City feel like a real place, or at least like a convincing version of 1980s Miami filtered through movies and television. The city becomes a character in its own right, not just a location, but an environment that shapes and reflects the story being told. The excess and optimism and corruption of 1980s Miami are all present in Vice City, creating a setting that makes Tommy's rise to power feel natural and appropriate. This is a city where criminals can become wealthy and powerful, where corruption is normal and violence is common, where someone like Tommy can build an empire if he's ruthless and skilled enough. Understanding Vice City requires understanding the cultural context it's drawing from and commenting on. The game is deeply rooted in 1980s crime media, particularly films like Scarface, Carlito's Way, and television shows like Miami Vice. These works defined how people think about Miami and crime in the 1980s, creating a mythology around that time and place that Vice City both embraces and satirizes. Scarface is the most obvious influence. The 1983 film, directed by Brian De Palma and starring Al Pacino as Cuban refugee turned drug lord Tony Montana, established many of the visual and narrative conventions that Vice City follows. The story of an ambitious criminal rising to power through violence and ruthlessness, the Miami setting with its drug trade and corruption, the excess and glamour mixed with brutality, all of these elements are present in both Scarface and Vice City. Tommy Vercetti's arc deliberately mirrors Tony Montana's. Both are outsiders who come to Miami and build criminal empires. Both are willing to do whatever it takes to succeed, and both ultimately stand alone at the top of their criminal organizations. But Vice City is not a simple adaptation or copy of Scarface. The game takes the themes and aesthetics of Scarface and combines them with elements from many other sources to create something that feels like a distillation of all 1980s crime media, rather than a retelling of one specific story. Miami Vice's influence is obvious in the visual style, the pastel colours and neon lights and fashion choices that define that show's look. The music selection draws from 1980s hits that were either featured in crime media or that evoke the era's sound. The game includes references to and homages to dozens of other films and shows, creating a dense web of allusions that rewards players who know the source material while still being entertaining for those who don't. The 1980s were a particular moment in American crime and culture that makes Vice City's setting especially resonant. This was the era of the cocaine boom, when Miami became the primary entry point for drugs coming into the United States from Latin America. The city was awash in money from the drug trade, leading to both enormous wealth and extreme violence as various factions fought for control of this lucrative business. The Scarface poster child of this era was the cocaine cowboy, the young criminal who could make millions in a short time if he was willing to take enormous risks and engage in brutal violence. This was also the era of Reagan and trickle-down economics, of conspicuous consumption and the belief that greed was good. The 1980s celebrated wealth and success in ways that previous decades hadn't, making heroes of businessmen and financiers and anyone who could get rich regardless of how they did it. This cultural context makes Tommy's rise particularly appropriate for the setting. He's pursuing the American dream as it was understood in the 1980s, accumulating wealth and power without concern for ethics or consequences. Vice City satirizes these elements even as it celebrates them. The radio commercials in the game are absurd exaggerations of real 1980s advertising, promoting products and services that are obviously harmful or scams while using the optimistic language and promises that characterized real ads from the era. The characters are stereotypes taken to ridiculous extremes, from Umberto Robina's machismo to Love Fist's rock star excess to Avery Carrington's corrupt businessman. The game is aware that the 1980s were often ridiculous, and that the crime mythology around Miami specifically was always somewhat absurd, but it leans into that absurdity rather than trying to ground everything in realism. This approach, combining celebration and satire, is what makes Vice City's tone so effective. The game clearly loves the 1980s aesthetics it's recreating. The music and fashion and style are all presented with obvious affection and attention to detail. But the game is also aware that this era and these aesthetics were often hollow, that the excess covered up emptiness, and that the glamour was built on violence and exploitation. Tommy's story is thrilling and entertaining, but it's also hollow in important ways. He achieves everything he wants but ends up isolated and paranoid, rich but not happy. Vice City was technically impressive for its time, representing a significant advancement over GTA Thurs in multiple areas. The game engine was refined to support better graphics and smoother performance. The city design was more detailed and more varied than Liberty City had been, with distinct neighborhoods that each had their own visual identity. The radio system was expanded with more stations and more music, creating a more immersive audio environment. The mission design was more ambitious, with set pieces and sequences that pushed the limits of what the engine could handle. But perhaps the most significant technical achievement was the voice acting. GTA 3 had been almost entirely silent, with the protagonist not speaking and most NPCs just shouting generic lines. Vice City invested heavily in professional voice acting, bringing in recognizable actors to voice the main characters and creating actual performances rather than just recorded dialogue. Ray Liotta as Tommy Vercetti gave the character a voice and personality that made him memorable and distinctive. Dennis Hopper, Burt Reynolds, Danny Trejo, Tom Sizemore and many other notable actors appeared in various roles, lending their talents to what could have been forgettable video game characters. This investment in voice acting elevated Vice City's storytelling significantly. Tommy isn't just a player avatar, he's a character with a distinct personality and voice, someone who reacts to situations and expresses opinions and has clear motivations. The cutscenes between missions became actual scenes with dialogue and performance rather than just exposition dumps. The interactions between characters felt more natural and engaging because the actors were bringing real skill to their performances. Ray Liotta's work as Tommy Vercetti deserves particular recognition because he brings real menace and charisma to the character. Tommy could have been a one-dimensional tough guy, just another video game protagonist who shoots people and makes threats. But Liotta gives Tommy complexity through his delivery, finding moments of humour or vulnerability or anger that make Tommy feel like a real person, rather than just a collection of crime movie cliches. His performance makes Tommy's confidence convincing. When Tommy threatens someone or makes a bold claim, Liotta's delivery makes you believe that Tommy can back it up. The supporting cast is equally strong, with each actor bringing something distinctive to their character. William Fichtner plays Ken Rosenberg as genuinely nervous and overwhelmed, creating a character who's both comic relief and genuinely sympathetic. Philip Michael Thomas, one of the stars of the original Miami Vice television show, plays Lance Vance, bringing credibility and swagger to a character who needs to be likeable before his betrayal. Luis Guzman plays Ricardo Diaz with appropriate paranoia and violence, making Diaz intimidating and unpredictable. Every major character is well performed, and even minor characters often have memorable voices and deliveries. This quality voice acting made Vice City feel premium and polished in a way that many games of the era didn't. Gaming was still establishing itself as a medium that could support serious performances and storytelling, and Vice City demonstrated that games could attract quality actors and could create performances that enhanced, rather than detracted from the experience. The game's success helped establish voice acting as an essential element of narrative-driven games, proving that players would respond positively to well-performed dialogue and characterization. Vice City's missions are varied and inventive, avoiding the repetition that can plague open-world games. While there are certainly missions that use similar mechanics, the game consistently finds new contexts and challenges to keep the gameplay fresh. Some missions are straightforward shooting sequences, others are races or chases, some require stealth or precision, and many combine multiple gameplay types in sequences that require different skills at different stages. The Malibu Club missions are particularly memorable for their ambition. The bank robbery mission requires you to coordinate with NPCs, managing crowd control and fighting through SWAT teams during the escape. The mission where you rob a rival club using security codes you've stolen earlier rewards planning and information gathering. These missions feel like actual heists, with multiple stages and potential points of failure, rather than just simple shoot-everything sequences. The demolition missions, while controversial for their difficulty, are distinctive and memorable. These missions use RC vehicles, either helicopters or cars, to complete objectives like planting bombs or destroying targets. The controls are different from normal gameplay, and the vehicles are fragile, creating significant challenge. Players either loved these missions for their uniqueness, or hated them for their difficulty, but either way, they're remembered, which is more than can be said for many game missions. The film studio missions provide comic relief with their absurdist scenarios and over-the-top characters. Protecting a porn film shoot from attacking gangs while the director shouts about lighting and angles is absurd in a way that works perfectly with Vice City's tone. These missions don't take themselves seriously, and that self-awareness prevents the game from becoming too grim or self-important. The assassination missions, accessed through phone booths around the city, provide optional challenges for players who want to test their combat skills. Each assassination has a specific target and specific conditions, sometimes requiring particular weapons or approaches. These missions reward experimentation and skill, giving completionist players additional content while not being mandatory for story progression. The street racing missions scattered throughout the city provide opportunities to test your driving skills without the pressure of police pursuit or combat. These races take advantage of Vice City's geography, using highways and city streets and beachfront roads to create varied courses. Winning races provides money and unlocks vehicle-related rewards, giving players incentive to engage with this optional content. The Rampage missions, triggered by pickup icons around the city, task you with killing specific numbers of specific enemies with specific weapons in time limits. These are pure arcade-style challenges, removing story context and focusing entirely on combat skill. They're throwbacks to earlier game design philosophies, but they fit Vice City's overall tone and provide quick bursts of intense gameplay for players who want a break from missions. Beyond the structured missions, Vice City rewards exploration and experimentation in ways that make the city feel alive and full of possibilities. The game is filled with secrets and Easter eggs, from hidden packages that reward completion with weapons and money, to unique jumps that challenge your driving skills, to random encounters and events that add texture to the world. The hidden packages are scattered throughout Vice City in locations that range from obvious to incredibly obscure. Finding all of them requires thorough exploration of every corner of the map, including rooftops and back alleys and waterfront areas that you might never visit during normal gameplay. The rewards for collecting packages escalate as you find more of them, with weapons spawning your properties and eventually significant money becoming available. This creates a clear incentive for exploration, while also encouraging players to truly familiarise themselves with the city's geography. The unique jumps are scattered around Vice City, marked by ramps or terrain features that can launch vehicles into the air. Successfully completing these jumps requires finding them, approaching at the correct angle and speed, and landing without destroying your vehicle. They're skill challenges that reward mastery of the driving mechanics, and completing all of them provides both satisfaction and monetary rewards. The city itself is divided into distinct areas, each with its own character and aesthetic. Downtown is all tall buildings and business districts, a urban core with heavy traffic and lots of pedestrians. Vice Beach is the tourist area, with hotels and beaches and the Ocean View Hotel where Tommy initially stays. Little Haiti and Little Havana are the ethnic neighbourhoods, where the Cuban and Haitian gangs are based, with distinct architecture and culture. Starfish Island is where the wealthy live, including Diaz's mansion that Tommy eventually takes over. Prawn Island is an entertainment district with the film studio and other businesses. Each area feels distinct and contributes to the sense that Vice City is a real city, with different neighbourhoods rather than just a generic urban environment. The waterways around and through Vice City add another dimension to exploration. You can steal boats and explore the coastline and the rivers, finding hidden areas and shortcuts that aren't accessible by land. The game includes some water-based missions, but mostly the waterways are just another part of the environment to explore and master. Learning to navigate by water can make certain missions easier and provides alternative escape routes when you're being pursued by police. The vehicle variety encourages experimentation and exploration. There are dozens of different vehicles in Vice City, from economy cars to sports cars to motorcycles to boats to helicopters. Each handles differently and has different performance characteristics. Finding and stealing exotic or unusual vehicles becomes its own reward, and the car showroom property specifically tasks you with locating and delivering rare vehicles. This vehicle collecting adds another layer of content for completionist players. Vice City's impact on gaming extends far beyond its commercial success, though it was certainly commercially successful. The game sold millions of copies and was critically acclaimed, winning numerous awards and appearing on countless best of lists. But more importantly, Vice City demonstrated what open-world games could be, and established design principles that countless other games would follow. The most obvious legacy is how Vice City proved that period settings could work for open-world games. Prior to Vice City, most open-world crime games used contemporary settings, assuming that players wanted to experience current cities and current culture. Vice City showed that a historical setting, particularly one with a strong aesthetic identity like 1980s Miami, could be even more compelling than a contemporary one. This opened up possibilities that later games would explore, from GTA San Andreas' early 1990s setting to Mafia 2's 1940s and 1950s, to countless other games that used historical periods to create distinctive identities. Vice City also established that open-world games could have tightly focused narratives and strong thematic identities. The game isn't trying to be everything to everyone. It's specifically a 1980s crime power fantasy, and everything in the game supports that vision. This focus makes Vice City more memorable and distinctive than it would be if it tried to include every possible gameplay type and story element. Later, open-world games often struggled with bloat and lack of focus, including so many activities and systems that the core experience became diluted. Vice City's example shows the value of knowing what your game is about and committing to that vision completely. The property system that Vice City pioneered became a staple of open-world crime games. The idea that you could buy businesses that generate passive income and that come with their own missions and storylines has been copied and expanded by numerous games. GTA San Andreas expanded this system significantly, and other series like Saints Row made property management even more central to gameplay. The property system works because it makes the player feel like they're building something permanent rather than just completing missions, creating investment in the game world that goes beyond just finishing the story. Vice City's approach to music and audio design set standards that games still follow. The radio system, with multiple stations playing licensed music from the era, created an authentic and immersive audio environment. Players associate specific songs with Vice City, and those songs evoke the game even when heard outside of gaming context. This use of licensed music was expensive and complicated from a legal perspective, but Vice City proved it was worth the investment, because the music contributed so much to the game's identity and atmosphere. The game's influence can be seen in countless titles that came after it. Saints Row started as essentially a GTA clone, but found its own identity by pushing the absurdity and humour even further than GTA did. Mafia 2 used a historical setting and focused narrative in ways that clearly learned from Vice City's example. Sleeping Dogs brought the open-world crime formula to Hong Kong with a similar commitment to making the setting feel authentic and distinctive. Even games outside the crime genre borrowed Vice City's approaches to world-building and environmental storytelling. Evaluating Vice City decades after its release requires acknowledging both its achievements and its limitations. The game is a product of its time, and some elements that were acceptable or unquestioned in 2002 now appear problematic or dated. At the same time, many of Vice City's core design decisions and narrative choices remain effective and even exemplary. What Vice City gets right is its sense of focus and identity. The game knows exactly what it wants to be and executes that vision with confidence and style. The 1980s Miami setting is realised beautifully, with attention to detail in everything from the music to the fashion to the architecture. The story is straightforward but effective, giving players a clear arc and satisfying progression from nobody to criminal kingpin. The gameplay variety keeps missions interesting while still feeling cohesive with the overall experience. The property system gives players agency and investment in the game world. The voice acting brings characters to life in ways that were uncommon for games at that time. These elements combine to create an experience that's memorable and distinctive, a game that feels like nothing else even within the GTA series. What Vice City gets wrong, or at least what hasn't aged well, includes its treatment of various ethnic and racial groups. The portrayal of Cubans and Haitians relies heavily on stereotypes, and presents both groups primarily as violent gangs without much nuance or context. The missions, where you're literally fighting one ethnic group on behalf of another ethnic group, are uncomfortable now in ways they might not have been at the time. The game's satire is broad and obvious, but sometimes it's not clear whether the game is mocking these stereotypes or just reinforcing them. This is a problem throughout the GTA series, but it's particularly noticeable in Vice City because the Cuban and Haitian conflict is such a prominent part of the game. The treatment of women in Vice City is also problematic from a contemporary perspective. Female characters are mostly either sex workers or girlfriends, with very few women having any agency or importance beyond their relationships to male characters. Mercedes Cortez is the most prominent female character, and she's defined entirely by being someone's daughter and someone's girlfriend. The strip club and pornography missions treat women's bodies as commodities without any real examination of what that means. This is typical of crime media generally and of GTA specifically, but it's worth noting that the game's world is almost entirely male-dominated in ways that reflect neither reality nor narrative necessity. The game's violence is extreme and consequence-free in ways that can be both cathartic and troubling. Tommy kills hundreds of people throughout the game, without any apparent psychological impact or moral consideration. Bodies disappear immediately, there are no families mourning the dead, no consequences beyond wanted levels that quickly fade. This is video game logic, creating a power fantasy where the player can engage in massive violence without having to think about what that violence actually means. For some players, this is part of the appeal. For others, it's a limitation that prevents the game from achieving any real depth or meaningful commentary on crime and violence. The mission design, while varied, occasionally falls into frustrating patterns. Some missions have checkpoints that feel arbitrarily placed, forcing you to replay large sections when you fail near the end. Some missions have difficulty spikes that feel unfair rather than challenging. The RC helicopter missions are particularly notorious for being frustrating in ways that break the flow of the game. These design issues are relatively minor in the context of the overall experience, but they're worth noting as areas where Vice City doesn't quite achieve the polish and balance it maintains in most other aspects. The wanted level system, while functional, can sometimes interfere with missions in ways that feel arbitrary. Certain missions require you to engage in criminal activity that triggers police response, but the mission doesn't account for you being pursued by cops while trying to complete objectives. This can turn missions into frustrating exercises in managing police attention, rather than completing the actual mission goals. Later GTA games refined this system with mission-specific wanted level rules, but in Vice City you sometimes have to deal with police interference during missions in ways that feel unfair. Despite these limitations and criticisms, Vice City remains beloved by many players and continues to be regarded as one of the best games in the GTA series. This enduring appeal comes from several factors that transcend the game's individual elements and create an experience that's greater than the sum of its parts. First, Vice City has a clarity of vision that many games lack. From the moment you start playing, you understand what the game is offering. A 1980s crime power fantasy set in a neon-soaked version of Miami. Everything in the game supports this vision, from the visual design to the music to the story to the gameplay mechanics. This focus creates a cohesive experience where every element feels intentional and contributes to the overall aesthetic and narrative goals. Playing Vice City feels like stepping into a specific time and place, and the game maintains that feeling consistently throughout the experience. Second, the game respects the player's time and intelligence in important ways. The story is straightforward and doesn't waste time on unnecessary, complications, or padding. Missions are generally focused and clearly explained, with objectives that make sense in context. The property system gives players meaningful choices about how to spend their time and money without overwhelming them with options. The game is substantial without being bloated. There's enough content to keep players engaged for dozens of hours, but not so much that completing everything feels like an impossible task. Third, Vice City captures something essential about the appeal of crime narratives that many other games miss. The game understands that players want to feel powerful and successful, that the fantasy isn't really about the violence itself, but about the transformation from nobody to somebody. Tommy's arc from released prisoner to criminal kingpin is satisfying because you experience every step of that progression. You earn the success through gameplay, rather than just watching it happen in cutscenes. The property system reinforces this by making your wealth visible and functional. You can see your empire growing and feel the impact of your success on the game world. Fourth, the 1980s setting provides built-in nostalgia and appeal that a contemporary setting wouldn't have. For players who lived through the 1980s, Vice City offers a trip back to that era with all its excess and style. For players who didn't experience the 1980s firsthand, the game offers a curated version of the decade that's been filtered through decades of media representation and cultural memory. The 1980s have become mythologized in popular culture, and Vice City taps into that mythology effectively, presenting not the real 1980s but the 1980s as they exist in our collective imagination. Fifth, the game's technical achievements and production values were impressive for the time and remain impressive in context. The voice acting brought real performances to video game storytelling in ways that were uncommon in 2002. The licensed music soundtrack created an authentic audio environment that most games couldn't afford or didn't think to create. The city design created a believable and explorable urban environment that felt alive and reactive. These technical accomplishments elevated Vice City above other games of its era and helped establish expectations for what open-world games should offer. Understanding Vice City's place within the broader Grand Theft Auto series provides additional perspective on why the game is significant and why it's remembered fondly. Vice City came between GTA 3rd, which established the 3D open-world template that defined the series, and GTA San Andreas, which expanded that template to include more systems and a much larger world. Vice City sits in an interesting middle position, taking what GTA 3 established and refining it without necessarily revolutionizing it. GTA 3 was groundbreaking but rough in many ways. The city felt empty and lifeless compared to later games. The story was minimal with a silent protagonist. The missions were relatively simple and straightforward. GTA 3 proved the concept of 3D open-world crime games, but it didn't fully realize the potential of that concept. Vice City took the foundation that GTA 3 built and added personality, style, and focus. Tommy Vercetti was a real character with a voice and motivations. The 1980s setting gave the game a distinctive identity. The property system added strategic depth, and the improved mission design created more varied and memorable gameplay experiences. GTA San Andreas, which followed Vice City, expanded in different directions. San Andreas had a much larger map covering multiple cities and rural areas. It added RPG elements like character customization and skill progression. It included even more activities and side content than Vice City had. San Andreas was more ambitious in scope and scale, but some players felt that the expanded scope came at the cost of focus and cohesion. Vice City's relatively smaller map and more focused narrative were seen as strengths rather than limitations. The game knew what it wanted to be and didn't try to be everything to everyone. The later 3D era GTA games, particularly GTA 4 and GTA 5, moved in different directions thematically and mechanically. GTA 4 was more grounded and serious, attempting to tell a more realistic crime story with moral complexity and consequences. GTA 5 returned to multiple cities and protagonists, creating an even more ambitious and expensive production than previous entries. Both games were critically and commercially successful, but many players still return to Vice City as a more pure and focused experience. A game that wasn't trying to comment on modern society or push technical boundaries, but was simply trying to tell an entertaining crime story in a distinctive setting. Vice City's legacy within the series is as the game that proved GTA could have personality and style beyond just the open-world gameplay formula. It showed that setting and atmosphere could be as important as mechanics and content, that a well-realized fictional world could be more compelling than a technically larger but less focused one. Every GTA game since Vice City has had to think about its identity and aesthetic in ways that earlier entries didn't, and that's partly because Vice City demonstrated how much identity and aesthetic could contribute to a game's success and memorability. Beyond the story and setting, Vice City deserves recognition for how well its core gameplay systems function, and how they work together to create a cohesive experience. The driving mechanics strike a good balance between arcade accessibility and satisfying handling. Cars feel different from each other without being frustrating to control, and the city design creates opportunities for both careful navigation and reckless stunts. The shooting mechanics are simple but effective, with auto-aim that makes combat accessible while still requiring some skill and strategy. The mission design shows real understanding of how to pace gameplay and create variety within consistent mechanics. Action missions are broken up by driving missions, which are broken up by missions that combine both elements. Difficulty escalates gradually, with early missions teaching basic mechanics and later missions requiring mastery of multiple systems simultaneously. Boss fights and major set pieces are distinct and memorable, without being so different from normal gameplay that they feel disconnected from the rest of the experience. The economy system, based around property ownership and mission completion, creates a satisfying progression loop. You complete missions to earn money. You spend money on properties and weapons. Properties generate passive income that accelerates your earning potential, and increased wealth enables you to take on bigger challenges and buy more assets. This creates a positive feedback loop where success breeds more success, which perfectly mirrors Tommy's narrative arc from struggling to get started to being so wealthy that money stops being a concern. The wanted level system creates dynamic tension during freeform gameplay without being overwhelming or punishing. Committing crimes raises your wanted level, which brings police response that escalates from single patrol cars to massive coordinated assaults, depending on how serious your crimes are and how long you remain wanted. But wanted levels can be evaded through various methods, from hiding and waiting for the heat to die down to using pay and spray garages that instantly clear your wanted level for a fee. This system creates risk and consequence without making it impossible to experiment or have fun with the game's systems. The save system, which allows you to save at properties you own, creates strategic considerations about when and where to save. Early in the game, you might only have one save location, making it risky to venture far from that location without completing your objectives. As you buy more properties, you get more save locations spread across the map, making it easier to save progress wherever you are. This simple system reinforces the property ownership progression and makes acquiring new properties feel valuable beyond just their income generation. Vice City's audio design deserves extended discussion because it's so central to the game's success and identity. The licensed music soundtrack includes dozens of songs across multiple radio stations, each station representing a different genre or aesthetic. Flash FM plays pop hits, Emotion 98.3 plays power ballads and soft rock, Wave 103 plays new wave and synth pop, V-Rock plays heavy metal, VCPR is a talk radio station with satirical content. This variety means that different players can find music they enjoy while also being exposed to songs and genres they might not seek out otherwise. The music isn't just background noise, it actively contributes to the game's atmosphere and emotional impact. Driving through Vice City at night with synthwave playing on the radio creates a specific mood and feeling that's central to the game's aesthetic. The music situates you in the 1980s more effectively than any visual element could, because music is so strongly associated with specific time periods in our memories. Hearing a song from Vice City's soundtrack outside of the game immediately evokes memories of playing the game and experiencing its world. The voice acting and dialogue create characterization and personality that written text alone couldn't achieve. Tommy's voice and delivery make him feel like a real person rather than a player avatar. His reactions and comments give him personality beyond just his actions. The supporting characters are brought to life through their voices, from Ken's nervous stammering to Lance's smooth confidence to Diaz's paranoid ranting. The quality of these performances elevates every cutscene and mission briefing, making the story more engaging and the characters more memorable. The ambient sound design creates a sense of place and activity. City streets have traffic noise and pedestrian chatter. Beaches have waves and seagulls. Industrial areas have machinery sounds. Vehicles have distinct engine sounds that help you identify them before you see them. Weapons have satisfying audio feedback that makes combat feel impactful. Radio DJs provide commentary and context between songs, creating the feeling of a real radio station rather than just a playlist. All of these audio elements combine to make Vice City feel like a living city, rather than just a game environment. The radio commercials and fake advertisements between songs are satirical commentary on 1980s consumer culture and American society generally. These commercials advertise absurd products and services, from dangerous pharmaceuticals to exploitative businesses to political campaigns, all using the optimistic language and production values of real 1980s advertising. The satire is broad but effective, highlighting the absurdity of consumer culture and the disconnect between advertising promises and reality. These commercials also provide comic relief and world building, suggesting that Vice City exists in a larger world with its own culture and concerns beyond just what we see in gameplay. Vice City has remarkable longevity for a game released in 2002. People still play it, speedrunners still compete in it, and it remains a common point of reference in discussions of open-world games and crime narratives in gaming. This longevity comes from several factors that make Vice City worth returning to even decades after its release. The focused scope means you can complete Vice City in a reasonable amount of time compared to more sprawling open-world games. A playthrough of the main story and major side content might take 30-40 hours, which is substantial but not overwhelming. This makes Vice City accessible for replays in a way that 100-plus hour games aren't. You can revisit the game and experience its complete story and most significant content without making a months-long commitment. The distinct identity and aesthetic make Vice City feel different from other games, even within the GTA series. If you want a 1980s crime experience, Vice City is essentially the only major game that offers that specific experience. This setting and style aren't just cosmetic, they define the entire experience in ways that make Vice City irreplaceable, rather than just one option among many similar games. The straightforward story and clear progression mean you always know what you're working toward and why. There's no confusing branching narrative or moral choices to agonize over, just a clear path from imprisoned nobody to criminal kingpin. This clarity makes Vice City comfortable and satisfying to replay. You know what to expect, and you can focus on enjoying the journey rather than trying to figure out where the game wants you to go or what it wants you to do. The property system and completion objectives give completionist players clear goals to work toward. Buying all properties, finding all hidden packages, completing all unique jumps, these are concrete achievements that provide structure and motivation beyond just finishing the main story. Players can set their own goals for what constitutes a complete playthrough, and work toward those goals at their own pace. The modding community has kept Vice City alive on PC with graphical improvements, new content, and various modifications that enhance or change the experience. While the console versions remain as they were at release, PC players can experience Vice City with modern graphical features or with gameplay modifications that change how the game plays. This modding support has extended the game's life and given it continued relevance among PC gaming communities. Vice City's influence extends beyond gaming into broader popular culture. The game became a cultural touchstone, referenced in other media and discussed in mainstream outlets in ways that games rarely were in 2002. The controversy around GTA games in general, and Vice City specifically, generated news coverage and debate about video game violence and content, raising the series' profile even among people who never played the games. The 1980s nostalgia that Vice City both reflected and encouraged has continued to grow in popular culture. Shows like Stranger Things and movies like Drive have capitalized on affection for 1980s aesthetics and culture, and Vice City was ahead of this curve, demonstrating that there was appetite for 1980s set media before it became a dominant trend. The game's success likely influenced other creators to explore 1980s settings and themes, contributing to the broader cultural moment of 1980s nostalgia we're still experiencing. The game's soundtrack introduced younger players to 1980s music they might not have discovered otherwise. Songs that were hits in the 1980s found new audiences through Vice City, and the game became associated with specific tracks that appear on the radio stations. For many people, hearing certain 1980s songs immediately brings Vice City to mind, creating a permanent association between the music and the game. Vice City contributed to gaming's growing cultural legitimacy and recognition as a storytelling medium. The game's voice acting, narrative structure, and thematic coherence demonstrated that games could tell stories with the sophistication and production values of other media. While games still struggled for recognition and respect from mainstream culture, Vice City represented progress toward gaming being taken seriously as an art form and entertainment medium. The game also sparked important discussions about video game content and ratings. The violence and mature themes in Vice City led to debates about who should be playing these games and what responsibility developers had regarding content. These discussions, while often sensationalized and misguided, at least acknowledged that games were culturally significant enough to be worth arguing about, which represented a kind of progress, even when the specific arguments were flawed. Understanding the technical aspects of Vice City's creation provides context for its achievements and limitations. The game was built using Rockstar's proprietary renderware engine, which was also used for GTA 3 and would be used for San Andreas. This engine allowed for the open-world design and streaming technology that made Vice City possible, loading city areas dynamically as the player moved through the world rather than requiring loading screens between areas. The development time for Vice City was remarkably short, roughly 9 months from the completion of GTA 3 to Vice City's release. This tight timeline was possible because Vice City reused much of GTA 3's technical foundation while focusing on new content as refinements rather than fundamental engine changes. The rapid development meant some features were limited or simplified compared to what might have been possible with more time, but it also contributed to the game's focused design since there wasn't time to add unnecessary complexity. The city design required careful planning to create a believable urban environment within the technical constraints of 2002 hardware. The PlayStation 2, which was Vice City's primary platform, had limited memory and processing power compared to modern systems, which meant the city had to be designed with constant awareness of performance limitations. Buildings had to be positioned to limit how many were visible at once. Traffic and pedestrian density had to be managed to prevent slowdown, and detail had to be concentrated in areas where players would spend the most time. The voice recording and dialogue implementation represented a significant investment of time and resources. Recording sessions with professional actors, integrating voice dialogue into cutscenes and gameplay, and ensuring the audio quality met standards all required technical and production expertise. The decision to fully voice the game rather than relying on text or limited voice work was bold for the time, and paid off in creating a more cinematic and engaging experience. The radio system required complicated licensing negotiations for the dozens of songs featured across multiple stations. Each song needed rights clearance, which involved negotiations with record labels and artists and potentially significant licensing fees. The fact that Vice City includes so much licensed music from recognizable artists demonstrates Rockstar's commitment to authenticity and atmosphere, even when it would have been cheaper and easier to use original compositions or lesser-known tracks. Playing Vice City in the present day is a different experience than playing it at release, both because gaming has evolved and because players' expectations and contexts have changed. The game is available on multiple platforms, including modern re-releases and remasters that update some technical aspects while preserving the core experience. Understanding how to approach Vice City today requires acknowledging both what the game still does well and where it shows its age. The graphics are obviously dated by modern standards. Character models are blocky, textures are low resolution, animations are limited, and the draw distance is short. These limitations were acceptable in 2002, but are jarring now, especially for players who started gaming in more recent eras. The recent remaster attempts to address these issues with updated graphics while maintaining the original art direction, but even the remaster can't completely overcome the fundamental limitations of the original design. The controls feel stiff compared to modern third-person action games. Tommy's movement is somewhat rigid, aiming can be imprecise, and the cover system is primitive compared to what modern games offer. These limitations were standard for the era, but can make Vice City feel clunky for a player accustomed to more refined control schemes. Adapting to these older control conventions requires patience and willingness to accept that games weren't as mechanically smooth in 2002 as they are now. The mission design occasionally shows its age with frustrating difficulty spikes and lack of checkpoints. Modern games generally include frequent checkpoints and more forgiving fail states, but Vice City sometimes requires replaying large sections of missions when you fail near the end. This was normal for 2002 but can feel punishing by current standards. players need to approach Vice City with appropriate expectations about difficulty and failure consequences. Despite these dated elements, much of Vice City still works remarkably well. The story remains engaging, the characters are still memorable, the 1980s atmosphere is still immersive, and the core gameplay loop of completing missions and building your criminal empire is still satisfying. The game's focused design and clear progression mean you're never confused about what to do next or why you're doing it. The property system still provides meaningful strategic decisions and satisfying progression. The music and voice acting remain high quality and effective at creating mood and character. Playing Vice City today is best approached as experiencing a historical artifact that's also still genuinely entertaining. This is a game that defined conventions and established templates that countless other games would follow. Understanding Vice City's place in gaming history enhances the experience because you can recognize what was innovative and influential about the game's design. At the same time, the game is still fun to play on its own merits, not just as a historical curiosity, but as a crime power fantasy that remains engaging and well executed. Grand Theft Auto Vice City occupies a secure place in the gaming canon as one of the medium's most influential and beloved titles. The game represents a perfect storm of effective design, strong aesthetic identity, technical achievement, and cultural timing that combine to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Vice City isn't perfect. It has limitations and flaws and elements that haven't aged well, but its strengths far outweigh its weaknesses, and its influence on gaming is undeniable. The game demonstrated that open-world games could have strong narrative identities and distinctive aesthetics rather than just being generic urban environments with crime mechanics. It showed that historical settings could be more compelling than contemporary ones when executed with attention to detail and commitment to atmosphere. It proved that investing in voice acting and music licensing could pay off in creating more immersive and memorable experiences. It established the property ownership and criminal empire building systems that would become standard in open-world crime games. Tommy Vercetti's story, while straightforward, is told with confidence and style that makes it memorable and satisfying. The rise from nothing to criminal kingpin is a classic narrative arc, but Vice City executes it perfectly, making every step of the progression feel earned and meaningful. The betrayals and conflicts feel natural rather than forced. These supporting characters serve clear functions while still being entertaining and memorable, and the resolution provides satisfying closure while acknowledging the hollowness of Tommy's victory. The 1980s Miami setting is realized so completely and convincingly that Vice City has become the definitive video game representation of that time and place. The music, the fashion, the architecture, the dialogue, everything works together to create an immersive world that feels authentic, even though it's obviously heightened and stylized. This setting isn't just window dressing, it's fundamental to the game's identity and appeal, making Vice City irreplaceable rather than just another entry in the GTA series. The gameplay systems, while not revolutionary, are refined and well integrated in ways that create a smooth and satisfying experience. The driving feels good, the shooting works well enough, the missions are varied and well paced, the property system adds strategic depth, and the wanted level system creates tension without being frustrating. These systems work together to support the power fantasy at the game's core, making you feel like you're actually building a criminal empire rather than just watching a story unfold. Vice City's legacy is visible in countless games that came after it, from direct imitators to games that borrowed specific elements, to games that reacted against Vice City's approach and tried to do something different. The game helped establish open-world crime games as a major genre proved that games could tell compelling stories with production values comparable to other media, and demonstrated that historical settings and strong aesthetic identities could differentiate games in crowded markets. For players experiencing Vice City for the first time today, the game offers a glimpse into gaming history and a chance to experience one of the medium's most influential titles. For players returning to Vice City after years away, the game provides nostalgia and the pleasure of revisiting a familiar and beloved world. For players who've never stopped playing Vice City, the game continues to offer the satisfactions that made it great in the first place. A focused crime power fantasy set in a perfectly realized 1980s Miami, with memorable characters, satisfying progression, and an atmosphere that no other game has quite matched. Conclusion: the enduring power of Vice City's vision. Grand Theft Auto. Vice City is a game about a man who builds a criminal empire through violence and ruthlessness, who betrays everyone who trusts him and kills everyone who stands in his way, who achieves everything he wants and ends up alone and isolated. It's not a complex story or a morally nuanced one. It doesn't try to comment deeply on crime or society or human nature. But it is a perfectly executed example of what it's trying to be. A crime power fantasy that lets players experience the rise to power that defines crime narratives while set in a version of 1980s Miami that's more vivid and memorable than the real thing ever was. The game succeeds because it understands its purpose and commits to that purpose completely. Every element of Vice City, from the neon-soaked visual design to the synthwave soundtrack, to the property ownership mechanics to Tommy Vercetti's character arc, supports the same vision and works toward the same goals. This focus and coherence is what makes Vice City special. Not any individual innovation or feature, but the way everything comes together to create a unified and immersive experience. Tommy Vercetti's story is complete. He came to Vice City with nothing. He built an empire through violence and cunning. He killed everyone who threatened him, including his former boss and his former partner, and he ended up ruling Vice City as its undisputed criminal kingpin. The game doesn't ask whether this was worth it or whether Tommy made the right choices. It simply presents his success as a success and lets players enjoy the power fantasy without moral complications. This straightforward approach is part of why Vice City works so well. It's not trying to be more than it is, or to deliver messages it's not equipped to deliver. Vice City represents a moment in gaming history when open-world games were still establishing their conventions and possibilities, when historical settings were risky rather than routine, when voice acting and music licensing were expensive investments that not every game could justify. The game's success helped establish that these investments were worthwhile and that players would respond positively to games that committed to distinctive identities and atmospheres rather than trying to be everything to everyone. Playing Vice City today, whether for the first time or as a return to a familiar experience, offers pleasures that few other games can match. The 1980s atmosphere is immersive and nostalgic. The story is clear and satisfying. The progression from nothing to everything is rewarding, and the city itself is a joy to explore and dominate. The game has limitations and elements that haven't aged well, but its core strengths remain powerful and effective. This is the complete lore of Grand Theft Auto Vice City, the story of Tommy Vercetti's transformation from released prisoner to criminal kingpin, told through missions and betrayals and business acquisitions, and the systematic elimination of everyone who stood in his way. It's a story about power and violence and ambition, about building something from nothing and defending it against everyone who wants to take it. It's not the most complex story in gaming, but it might be one of the most perfectly executed, a crime narrative that knows exactly what it wants to be and achieves that vision with style, confidence, and an unforgettable 1980s atmosphere that no other game has matched. Tommy Vercetti's Vice City is a place of neon and violence, excess and emptiness, success and isolation, and experiencing his rise to power remains one of gaming's most memorable and satisfying journeys.